Welcome everyone to today's virtual venture cafe featuring Elaine Dixon from Mavenly Consulting. We are so excited to have Elaine back with us to talk about the ways that financial services and other services can be enablers in your business. And I am sorry to butcher your introduction, Elaine. I will let you take over from here. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you everyone else for joining. It's a pleasure. Now, you can tell me in the chat, and I'll know by your age or just how cool you are, whether you have seen the movie, The Untouchables, which came out about 30 plus years ago. And in that movie, and this was during Prohibition, we had the famous gangster Al Capone. And law enforcement was trying to send Al Capone to jail for the longest time, and they could not nab him. And as in most things, when you're struggling in life and it's not working out, you call in the big guns. And so the IRS became sort of the tool that would be used in the movie to capture Al Capone. And one of the famous lines from the movie, very soon Al Capone realized that if he was caught, it was because the IRS had caught his bookkeeper. And so he came up with this ruse to try to hide his bookkeeper. And then it became sort of law enforcement's job to find the bookkeeper. And one of my favorite lines is Al Capone says, "You got nothing in court. You don't got the bookkeeper. You got nothing, nothing." And it's the same point I'd like to make today in my session as I talk about sort of the importance of strategic partnerships, that I firmly believe that without the right finance person, you got nothing. Because in order to have sort of a good, really functioning business, that you need the right bookkeeper, the right accountant, the right tax person, and probably similar to sort of your lawyer or doctor. The finance person in your life is probably the one that you hold one of the closest relationships to, and that also translates to business. So I'll probably come back to sort of this line, because I firmly believe that without your finance person, you got nothing. So when we think about business, and I don't know where you are on sort of that trajectory, and feel free to tell me if you are just starting a business, thinking about starting a business, are in business, or are just curious about the session. I think that we can think about sort of what is needed to run a successful business. And as I thought about that, I think of client relationships being really important. If you're an established business and you have employees, that's sort of your core. You know, I am of the belief that your employees make the business, that if you treat them well, they'll treat your clients well. And so client relationships and product or service development become sort of those other key pieces. But then what else do you need? You have to market the business, you're hopefully selling a product or service, and then you're either recruiting, training, honing the skills of your employees. And of course, there's the finance and tax components that round out sort of some of the services that you need. And then you're operating in sort of that major sort of macro environment, because we're all part of sort of the ecosystem. So when I think about these range of services, one of the points I'm hoping to drive home today is that you as the business owner should be focused on, one, your client relationships, if you're starting to establish those, and two, the product or service that you're trying to deliver. I get really, really concerned when I meet with sort of owners of businesses, and they're especially established businesses, and they are the person also doing sort of some of the finance work. Because it tells me, sometimes with good reason, but it tells me that you're not focused on the areas that you need to be, and that in the long term or even the midterm, that you might hurt the business that you're really trying to grow. So hopefully one of the key takeaways from that slide I just showed is that as an entrepreneur, as a business person, you cannot be performing all of these functions and do them well. So one of the things is that you have to realize that there needs to be areas that you're focused on. All right, so here's a screen that talks about the relationships. So you see the successful business in the middle there, and then the services I just talked about are sort of what are crucial to the business. So the key takeaway I would like you to have from that slide, and you can see the many hands that a business person is being asked to do when you're trying to do everything by yourself. And so what I would like to leave with you is that it's best that you're focused on the client relationships and building the business, and that you start to think about what's best to delegate to others and also to outsource to partners, which is where we would come in. So what's the value of finance? And I sort of put it in 4 buckets. And really, one of the things that I talked about is that when we get calls from clients, and these are not the calls that I like, 1, because they're expensive to you, and 2, because they give you heartburn, is when someone is calling us because they've gotten a notice from the IRS, or they're realizing that this is not the structure I really wanted for my business. Maybe I didn't set it up correctly, or I have a major problem that I now need fixed. And so the ask that you're making is either to do some cleanup of your books because you need to do some work with a bank that's requiring your financials, or you need to respond to the IRS. What we're asking folks that we're interfacing with is to take a step back and think about what the value of finance is for your business. So in terms of regulatory or compliance, certainly around tax, setting up with the state, setting up with federal agencies, making sure that you're doing the actual sort of what I would call organizational work before you're off and running. And then, of course, equally important are those sort of internal controls. Are there segregation of duties? What does my fraud or cybersecurity or all of those things look like for my business? And depending on the stage of business that you are, obviously some of these will not apply, or certainly not at the same level, but it doesn't mean that they're not things that you should be thinking about. And then, of course, the financial reports, which are, sort of the key piece. This is where the bookkeeping takes place, making sure that you have those internal reports, which are your management reports, and then any reports that you need to give out externally, and all the transactions that happen on a monthly basis, whether it's via banking, and then thinking about sort of your working capital. What does your cash flow look like in terms of running the business? The 2 pieces I really think are value added certainly fall under the sort of strategic and strategic and stewardship pieces. That even though all 4 components are very, very important, having that strategic partner who is either a co-creator or a challenger saying, let me look at those long-term goals that you have. Are those really realistic? What would it look like if it was not 10%, but 5%? What if you had a downward turn? Have we stress tested these numbers to make sure that if there is a downturn, that you could still pay your bills? All of these things are happening in these core buckets of stewardship and strategic partnerships. And then, of course, thinking about sort of what key performance measures are necessary for you as a business owner to be able to look at how you're doing on whether it's a weekly or monthly or quarterly basis to say, am I meeting my targets? Are my goals realistic? Are some of the value that we're bringing as finance persons? And then that sort of thought leadership. For example, I do a blog, and I'm always excited about writing and sort of what are the trends, what are new topics coming up in accounting or tax or risk management, because those are things that are really critical to your business. So really, really seeing finance as the partner who walks alongside with you, that yes, it's critical that your bookkeeping is in order. It's really critical that you're set up for compliance issues, but what's that next step that we would call the value add? And I think that happens in these other buckets over here. So for those who don't know me, now having told you what I do for business, my name is Elaine Dixon, and I'm the CEO and owner of Mavenly Consultants. We provide strategic finance, accounting, and HR services in partner with one of our partners, James Good, to really small and mid-sized businesses. And it's all of the things that I've talked about. I love getting my hands dirty with startups because, you know, you learn so much at the startup level. Startups need compliance help, you know, because they're just setting up. They need banking help because they're getting, you know, sort of new banking. They might need payroll help depending on the level of infusion of cash they have and whether or not they have employees. So you get to touch on sort of all of the services that finance offers. And, you know, we help with budgeting. You know, do you need a 3-year or a 5-year forecast? And then just that ongoing strategic work that I talked about, making sure that we're teasing out sort of your long-term goals and that you're on track to meet those. And these services are especially to small and mid-sized businesses. And I am really excited in really jumping in with those types of organizations, because the larger you are, the more likely it is that you have these services in-house. So one of the things that I want to, you know, underscore, which you saw from an earlier slide, is that a busy entrepreneur shouldn't be wearing too many hats. And that if you are not focused on the client relationship, on the product development or service, you're going to hurt your business. And I want to say that I empathize greatly, and I totally understand why this is often the case. Because unless you come from money, or, you know, you've gotten sort of, you know, financing help as you're starting out your business, which is often not the case, you're really struggling to make ends meet. And so part of what you're thinking about is not just how to build a business, but how to make sure that you're not putting on and getting too many costs as you're starting out. And so mitigating your cost is also as important as growing your business when you're starting out. So I get that. But here's what I'm here to make the case for, is that sometimes the overhead costs that we try to avoid, we end up paying them down the line and at a more costly rate, because we have made the mistakes that we wouldn't have if we had had sort of this value-added partner. And so I do encourage us that if our backgrounds are not sort of in finance, tax, or accounting, that we're really seeking out that help, that, you know, and we see finance more than just sort of an overhead cost, because we're certainly more than that. So to summarize, relegating finance to a cost line is really bad for business. You get what you pay for is what you often hear. And sometimes that includes yourself, that, you know, when you try to do your own bookkeeping, some of you know, is that the errors can be tremendous. But also think about the fact that if you're not paying someone to be sort of the strategic partner, they're not incentivized in ways that could really add value. And so if you're thinking about building strategic relationships and adding value and having partners that do that, then going the least cost way is not going to be the way that's successful for the business. I thought I'd throw in here options just for transparency. The DIY we talked about, doing it yourself. Certainly if you're large enough, and, you know, it's something we encourage firms as well, you know, just to be transparent about that, that I don't think that consulting or outsourcing is a fit for every business, that depending on your size, there comes a time when you do need sort of that in-house help who is, you know, more readily available. But these are the options before you, especially for startups. I see that, you know, they're sort of the dabbling in the DIY that we talked about. But thinking about sort of the range of capabilities that finance is able to bring to you as an outsourcing, and also the fact that often is the case, you're not paying for that sort of full compensation because benefits is not included as part of the rate that you're paying a consultant. So there are pros and cons, and, you know, certainly I like to think that collaborating with an outsourced partner who has your business at heart is a really great benefit. But it's something to certainly think about as to where you fit in this matrix and what the benefits are at each stage. I think I'd be remiss to not talk about sort of the impact that COVID has certainly had on businesses. I could tell you so many stories. One company that I think of, an auto body shop that we worked with through the whole COVID experience, it was really hard to see sort of a multi-million business overnight sort of become sort of the struggling business. And just to tell you a little of the backstory, so they do collision. And so if people are staying home because they're asked to by their states and they're not driving, then sadly, we don't want this to happen, but they're not getting into accidents. So there's no collision to fix. And so we had this business that we worked with that, almost overnight, work had dried up because cars were parked. And so, that was sort of a similar story you saw under COVID. I'm sure many of you could share stories of your own business or businesses that you worked for. That COVID and the disruption that happened sort of redefined what business looks like and what it means and how do you pivot and who becomes an essential worker. And certainly our lives, and in many cases for businesses, our lives were upended. And I want to speak especially to Black and Hispanic-owned businesses because they suffered the most. And especially when you think of these types of businesses that were already at a disadvantage in terms of, being able to access capital, having the least amount of employees, were the ones making the least amount of revenue. To then have this happen on top of that was more disastrous than for others. But there is good news out this morning, and we want to celebrate that too, that GDP growth. The news out this morning is that GDP growth is almost back to pre-pandemic levels. And, I want to pause and also celebrate that the fact that, under the current and previous administrations, that we had enough lending to small and mid-sized businesses, that many were able to come through this really tough period. And what we're hoping is that we don't end up with a third wave where we're again under lockdown, because as we can see, small and mid-sized and all businesses really have the resilience to be able to pivot in ways that many of us never thought would happen and to come out on the other side. But I do want to underscore that many didn't make it. And I will show you some more details on the next slide. But here was finance in the middle of this. Certainly, we don't want to put finance on the same level as our healthcare workers or grocery workers that were out there on the front lines, or delivery workers that were doing an amazing job during this whole period of making sure that we stayed healthy, that we had food and all the other services that were being provided. But when we think of business, certainly finance was the one that was helping with PPP loans. How do you figure this out? How do you know if you qualify? What about the restaurant revitalization loans? How do you pivot to a different strategy? If employees can't come in, and if I can't get people coming into my business, how do I have sort of curbside pickup? What sort of technology will I need to drive that? These were all decisions being made in partnership with your finance and accounting and tax persons. And what were the implications for my business from a tax perspective? What are the new risks that come into play? Because I'm now online more and I need technology that will keep me away from some of the hackers and cybersecurity threats that are out there. So a lot happened in the last year, and digital transformation accelerated at a pace that we have not seen in many decades. And finance became a key partner for many and continued to be a key partner for many in the business space. So I want you to reflect on the ways that even the relationship that we have with finance has changed over the last year plus. So this is the report I talked about as we celebrate sort of the good news this morning, that in the first few months in 2020, more than 20% of businesses moved from an active to inactive status. And it's one of the largest slumps we have seen over decades, as the chart will show you. So I do want to underscore that even as many, many businesses have rebounded with help and figured out new ways of working, that many did not survive. And for example, there was a point last year into this year when it said 1/3 of small businesses in New York, that's close to us, some of us, are totally closed. 1/3 of businesses in New York, one of our major, not just cities in the US, but around the world, had such a significant negative impact. So what does the future of work look like? Is it working from your bed, even as a business owner with your pet beside you and a computer? And what are the implications for that sort of work environment? If you're an employer with employees, what does that mean for liability? What does it mean for tax? What does it mean for accounting? What does it mean for your financial reporting? And how does this shift affect your business long-term? These are all some of the questions that you should be wrestling with, and that your finance person, as a partner who is invested in sort of the growth of your company and its long-term survival, will be helping you answer, and that you should be asking along with them. So part of what is really important, and what I share with clients, especially having gone through sort of traumatic 2020 into 2021, and for many still trying to survive, is that your survival depends on being able to manage this crisis, and you don't have to do it alone, right? Not only do you have sort of these partners, but there are agencies, the SBA, SCORE, local agencies, Venture Café here, give a big shout out, that is able to help you during these moments of crisis. And then at the same time, concurrently, you have to be assessing and understanding what are the changing dynamics and how do those affect my business. So certainly around risk management, around technology, around new accounting rules, around new tax rules. Those are things that you have to be thinking about at the same time as you're thinking about saving your business. And then how do I maintain or get a competitive edge? How do I adjust? How do I pivot? How do I adapt to thrive just beyond, sort of surviving or breaking even? But the goal here is to grow a business that is profitable and thriving. I'm curious as to whether or not any of you have sort of changed the technologies in the last year. Have you gone to sort of using any new automated processes online? Maybe you're in the restaurant business and had to sort of do catering. If you could let me know, that would be really interesting to find out. But that's one of the things that we're seeing, that the technology that is being used even for small businesses has changed significantly. And so especially for experts that are sort of in the finance technology space, their work has become really critical. Certainly virtual bank accounts are a reality even for small businesses. Fintech is a big thing in the space. And so as financial consultants, as strategic partners, we're not just here for the growth, we're here for the downturn, we're here for the regulatory compliance, we're here for the expansions, and we're here because we're doing this continuous education, continuous improvement, so that we're able to serve you in a way that brings you and make you aware of all these new services, because our goal is to keep you focused on what you need to be focused on, so that we are providing the service of being that person in the room saying, hey, are you aware that this new service is out? That, for example, yesterday the SBA announced that there's now a new form at their website, that you don't have to do anything anymore of going through a lender, but once your lender signs up to this new form, that you can just ask for forgiveness of your PP loan straight from the SBA's website. That's something that your finance person would be able to share with you and to be able to help you to think about, how do we also make sure that the processes we're putting in place are more efficient and are making your life easier, so that you're spending the chunk of your time on client and service or product development. So I think where I would like to leave you is to really think about, what does it mean to have a business in 2021 and beyond? What does that look like? What services will you need? What partners will you need? And what key partners will you need? Because that's really, really important. And I would like to also underscore, going back to sort of my Al Capone thing, that I am of the opinion that one of those key partners has to be your accounting, your finance person. You need that bookkeeper, as Al Capone says, but one that certainly comes with a lot more integrity. Because to underscore, we're able to provide early warning signals, even before COVID, of we're looking at your metrics. These variances are concerning, or these are great. Maybe you should be thinking about investing in something to store some of this money away. Or let us help you do some stress testing to see if a third wave comes in October or September. What will your business look like? Will you be able to pay your bills? Or maybe it has something to do with, how do I improve my DSO? Meaning, can I collect my money earlier for my clients? And what strategies do you suggest for maybe paying my customers or my vendors, on a different schedule that helps me to manage my money better? And what about this new world that I will need to operate in? How do I shed this business as usual and accept that change is the only constant and that it's permanent? The changes that have come under COVID. How do I employ new ways of working that gives me a competitive edge? These are the questions. These are the things that we're helping our customers understand and adopt, that they are able to thrive and that they're able to also have the confidence. Because one of the things that I realize in this business is that sometimes the struggle that our clients have is that they don't feel confident that they can keep up with the pace of digital transformation. So what are the right tools and how do we make sure that you have them? And how do we walk alongside you on this journey to make sure, and I hope that, very soon we're on the other side of COVID, but that also it's not just COVID, but that you're prepared for any sort of pandemic, any sort of traumatic, any sort of seismic shift that the business environment might have. I do believe that your accountant, your finance person is that partner that can walk with you through all of that. I do want to pause here just to think about some questions and just comments that you might have. And I also want to again just underscore how thankful I am that you've decided to join me today. Ways that I'd love for you to engage beyond today. Certainly, I have a blog that I try to put out what I think is really good information for small and mid-sized businesses, especially. So if you're online, I'd love if you would sign up. But if you're on Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, there are other ways to engage as well. So please feel free to say hi. Also reach out with questions if you have any after today, because we're in the business of helping. And so I love to have some of those conversations. You can find me in any of these platforms at Mavenly Consult. And I think our team would love to engage with you in ways that help you grow your business, or if you're just thinking about starting a business or any of the ways. So I could see that some of you, I'm just reading some of the things in the chat, saying that you've watched the movie. Others are saying that you need to watch the movie, but I would highly recommend that, along with following me on social media, that you absolutely watch The Untouchables. It's a great movie. So thank you again for today, Amy, Antuni, and Venture Cafe, and all of you that have joined. I hope that there's something that you can take away from today's session that will be helpful to you in some way in your business. And I'd love to engage you in any questions or any comments that you would have at this time.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions? My major concern, and you touched on it just briefly, was the idea that there could be a third wave. Is there anything you're looking at doing right now with some of your clients? I guess it depends on what kind of business they have, but what are people doing to prepare and get this?
That's a great question, and I think some of that is regional. But we always strongly suggest that regardless of where you are in the world, that you honestly prepare and expect that unless we have some significant shifts that we are going to be experiencing. All the science tells us that by October, there will be a third wave. And because it's a virus, it can travel. So even though for those of us that are joining from Rhode Island, I think we've done a great job in sort of getting vaccinated. I think our state is over 70%. But the fact that we interact with other states that are at much lower levels, that this can spread quite easily. So, in terms of things that, technology is a big one. Get the systems that you need in place that can help you if you have to go back to sort of a remote situation where everyone is working from home. And I think, certainly for companies that can afford it, because let's be honest, especially for a small business, that's hard because cost comes into play. But if you're going to be able to have all your employees work remotely and support the business in a way that makes sense, then that's got to be an investment that you do. And in tandem with that is just making sure that you have the right risk management levels in place. Anytime you're online, fraud comes into play. So we're always checking in on sort of, what does the crisis management or cyber management or risk management plan looks like, what steps are in place, different employees logging on, some from different countries, certainly different regions. And so, having a fraud management plan that can work from wherever your employees are is really critical. But in terms of the employees themselves, thinking about, if someone has to be out because they've caught COVID or because their family structure, that might mean that, they're unavailable for a while. What is the plan B, if sort of key employees are out? So are you building relationships, with sort of whether it's childcare or, some other agency that could be your backup plan. So those are some of the ways that we're engaging with clients about just thinking of what that next step is. Having one of the big things we work on around financials. Okay, so this is your 2021 budget and your growth plan is for 3% next year or 5% or 10%. But what if there's no growth plan? So having sort of that, stress testing done, making sure that you have, sort of a downward scenario is also a really critical part of that so that you can look at best case and worst case scenarios.
Excellent. Thank you. That's awesome. I wrote down a lot of things right there. And then Charity put in the chat both how long have you been in this business and how do you become a consultant in finance and how does this all kind of work for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So if you were at part one, I left corporate. Wow, it feels like 2 decades now. So and shortly after I left corporate, I started my own consulting. But my background, my undergrad is in accounting. I have an MBA, so that's sort of the educational background. And I started in investments, worked for Putnam Investment for a while, and what is now Bank of America. It was Fleet, and then Fleet Boston, and sort of mergers. Excuse me. So we certainly do one-on-one business consulting and strategic consulting, because some of those that we're working with are small business owners just starting out. And so, what they might need help with might be a simple business plan, for example. So some of those one-on-one conversations do happen, but most of our services are marketed to small business or mid-sized businesses. I mean, the range of what their revenues or, assets under management might be vary. Right now, we're working with a client on a compensation review and they're a $1 billion client. So, that's sort of the larger end of the clients that we support. But certainly one-on-one consulting is available. It's just not where we spend most of our time unless it's a small business, that's engaged in trying to build their business that would be working with individuals. I hope that answers the question that's being asked. But going back to sort of giving some more context to my own background, one, I'd encourage you to listen with sort of the first recording that I did about a month ago, because I talked about sort of why and how I left corporate. But I think part of what's really important is that I felt I had the skill sets, both the practical as well as the educational knowledge, and certainly the appetite and the right risk level to be able to jump off a corporate ladder and say, I would be willing to try my hand at doing something for myself, because it does take a lot of time. It's a lot of risk. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of ask. You know, you're before clients, asking them to trust you with a very prized asset of theirs, their business. And so having the right mix of skills is really important. Making sure I'm checking here that I'm not missing any questions. So Charity, I hope I answered your question around, you know, sort of consulting background. Yes, mentors, I would highly recommend that you, you know, if you're looking for, like I mentor through Rhode Island Hub. If you're not familiar with sort of their venture mentoring program, I would highly suggest that you check them out as well. Other questions or things that are really important? Thank you. So 5 more minutes with you. And, you know, I just want to encourage folks who, you know, are possibly thinking about going into consulting. There's never been a better time to join something than when there's disruption. Disruption creates opportunities. And so while I recognize that there are a lot of uncertainties, you know, certainly coming out of 2020 into 2021, disruptions create opportunities. So as you think about sort of COVID, what are the new business needs, you know, that didn't exist before then. And we saw this as well in sort of a 2008 recession. At some of our best, you know, companies, depending on how you view Uber and sort of pollution, came out of that era, that a lot of new businesses were started then. And we see, you know, that while many of the businesses that are starting now might not rival an Amazon, but that, you know, in the delivery space that we're seeing that new businesses are entering, certainly there has been a need for people being home and needing services delivered. So if you're thinking about jumping in, now is absolutely the right time. It is always the right time when there's disruption in the market. And, you know, Robinhood went public today, you know, championing sort of small people, or small, I should say the little people. You know, if you don't have a lot of money, I think, you know, certainly Robinhood caters to a younger generation. I think roughly age about 31 and have about $4,500 in the bank, not sort of the Charles Schwab, Vanguard or Fidelity type customers. So that's a big deal. They were going public today at $32 billion, you know, which we could argue whether or not they're certainly worth that value, but that's where they went public today, that as the markets open. So just be thinking about what your idea is, and you know, when is it best? It's always now.
And Toonie wrote it in Disruption Equals Opportunities with the capitalizing Toonie. I do have a question, just because I mentioned RIHub, or sorry, SEG Greenhouse, but can you also talk about your experience with VMS and how that's working, so we can, I mean, maybe you.
Yeah, absolutely. I you know, and part of that is my own love. I believe in you know, giving back and paying forward. I think I've shared before, certainly I think in my first presentation, that I'm not a big believer in sort of we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. I believe that most of us at some point in our lives were helped by others, and that even if we were, that we should give back to society. That's sort of a belief I hold dearly. And so Rhode Island Hub allows me to be able to certainly share my skill sets, and equally important, learn from others. That, you know, it's a team approach to mentoring, and they're brilliant people in that room that you get to learn a lot from. And you also learn a lot about sort of the new businesses that are coming up and the ideas that people have, which are amazing. And so to walk alongside some of those new businesses and support them, I think it's a privilege. And so I am happy to be in that space, to learn about the new businesses that are coming, certainly for my state, to help boost the state of Rhode Island, you know, to help us sort of get some of those unemployment numbers down, and also just to support people that are looking for whether it's finance or just general business knowledge. And I think Rhode Island Hub has done a fantastic job of that. And so I'm happy to be in that ecosystem supporting those businesses.
Excellent. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with RIHub and DMS, I am going to drop the link in the chat right now. If you do have your own small business, if you are thinking about starting a small business and you're getting it launched and you're kind of ready for some of that more in-depth mentoring, please do check it out. I think there's a link to apply right on that page, but you can always connect with the good folks over at RIHub. And if you need help connecting with them, please let us know. Toonie and I can both connect you. But yeah. Elaine, that was my, I definitely wanted to get that out there because I know that you are a very sought after mentor.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Toonie. And thank you all for joining us. And I hope that you'll stay on if you can and support some other businesses, but always come back to this. This is a great space to be in. Thank you, Toonie, for all the great work you do over there.